What's up guys, welcome back to the channel, and we are continuing on our 1982 DeLorean DMC-12 project for the channel. Really happy you guys are along for the ride for this thing because we're going to be doing everything that you can imagine to this car. Last episode we went ahead and put the V8 and the Porsche gearbox in the back of the DeLorean, so if you haven't seen that episode yet, we'll put it in the link in the description below and you can come back and see what we're going to be doing this episode. We're going to get started by making our transmission mount for our Porsche gearbox and our motor mounts for our Chevy V8. Now we have concerns about the chassis stiffness in the back of our DeLorean because from the factory this thing came with a measly 120 horsepower and did 0 to 60 in somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 seconds. We're going to be putting down between 500 and 600 horsepower now, so we have to reinforce everything and make it a little bit stronger. So let's get started on that transmission mount and we'll work our way back to the other items we were talking about. Guys, we're going to get started on our transmission mount for our DeLorean swap for the Porsche gearbox. This tab right here is what's going to start us off with actually making our mount to go from the Porsche gearbox, which has a 2-bolt big rubber mount on the front of the transmission, to be able to then attach it on this end to the DeLorean. In order to do that, we're going to go ahead and use the same chromoly tubing we'll be using for our engine mounts, and we're going to be using some plate on either side to be able to grab the inside of the actual transmission. This is going to go inside of the tunnel, and then from here we'll be able to use our template to be able to make this piece out of 1/4 inch, which is then going to go and fish mouth into the front of the chromoly, then making this big beefy transmission mount. Since all the power of the transmission is held by this one mount right here, we want to make it really strong. So we're going to go ahead and make 2 of these. We're going to fish mouth them into here, final weld everything, and then we're also going to put a gusset across the top to be able to box it all in. So let's go ahead and start blending and start welding. Alright guys, as you can see, we have all our pieces of the puzzle of our transmission mount done. Our side plates are going to go ahead and get welded like so. Our chromoly tubing, and then we have our 1/4 inch end caps that are going to go all around the transmission and fish mouth right into it just like that. So the next step we're going to have to do is weld it together. So we're going to have this piece and this piece all mocked up in the car. Liam's going to go ahead and tack weld that in place. We're going to bolt these to the actual transmission, tack weld them in place, and then pull the whole thing out to final assemble it and be able to put our gusset on top. Simple. Alright guys, our transmission mount is done, and as you can see, this thing is beef cake. So I went overkill on this thing because as you can see on the Porsche transmission, we have a spare one here on the vent. This is your only mounting point for the transmission in the car. There's nothing else. So from here all the way to where the motor mounts are, it's completely free spanning and just laying out there in the wind. So with all 600 horsepower going to this thing, and this is spinning, this whole transmission is going to want to come out of the car. It's going to want to rip right out of the chassis. So we went ahead with 1/4 inch material all the way around, completely encompassing the factory mount here. And it's a tight fit, but when it slides on there like that, we got our grade 8 bolts that we go right through the factory points. And this thing's going to be completely wedged up into the DeLorean chassis, and it's not going anywhere. So we're going to go ahead and throw this in the car now and start working on our motor mounts. We have our first piece of our motor mount all set. As you can see, we have our ICT billet mount that actually goes on the block side. Liam went ahead and made these 1/4 inch side plates with this chromoly tubing. This is going to get welded like this, and then it's going to be actually attached to the ICT billet mount, which then gets bolted to the block. From there, we're going to take chromoly tubing and fish mount it to this point here, down to our actual frame on the DeLorean, making our motor mounts. These are going to look really good and really professional when we're all said and done, and they're going to be able to keep that 600 horsepower in check when we have it all installed in the car. So let's go ahead and bolt these in right after we weld them and start connecting our dots. Alright guys, now that we have the motor mounts done, we have our plates in, Liam went ahead and made our points that are actually bolting to our billet motor mounts that are bolted to the block itself. So this is going to be actually fixed in the car solid. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take the same material we used to make our transmission mount, we're now going to go ahead and make our motor mount. So what he's going to do is triangulate from this point to this plate on the top, and from this point to the plate on the bottom. And then we'll possibly do some gussets on the side to tie this all together. Once this is said and done, this entire bracket is going to be solid in the car, and then these mounts will actually come out with the motor when we pull it. We have plenty of real estate to be able to come up the 2 inches that's required to be able to slide it back this way. So let's go ahead and start cutting some tubes, fitting them up, and getting them welded in. Alright guys, so we have our passenger side motor mount all welded in. We went ahead and used the 1 inch chromoly tubing to triangulate this mount. We're probably going to add a third one from here to here. And we got our plate all welded in, our 1/8 inch base plate to be able to give more strength and be able to tie into the factory DeLorean chassis. Now that being said, this side is the side where the engine is going to lift under load. So we're probably going to make this one significantly stronger with a little bit more gussets. Whereas the other side, the driver's side, is going to be pushing down. So we're not going to have to go as crazy. This engine's not going to make a ton of power, but we want to make sure that we can really thrash on this thing on the track and not worry about anything breaking. So let's go ahead and head over to the driver's side now and repeat the process. So now on the driver's side, our mount had to be shifted back in order to make clearance for our starter. Our base plate on the passenger side and our motor mount on the passenger side were pretty much in line with each other. This one's going to have to get jogged back. So we're going to come from this surface and run back and grab this chromoly tube, and this surface and run back and grab the same chromoly tube, just like we did on the passenger side. The only difference is that this is going to be shifted back significantly in order to make clearance for our starter. Now that's not going to make it any weaker, it's just going to change the geometry and the way the actual mount looks when it's mounted in the car. So let's go ahead and start cutting some tubes and get them mounted in there so we can start welding and get the mounts done. Motor mount is done. As you can see, it's more of a linear setup. I took two 1 inch pieces of chromoly and layered them beside each other. We're going to go ahead and put a gusset on the inside a little bit later on when we pull the motor back out for final assembly. The reason we went with this approach as opposed to putting the bar down here is the starter. So the starter has to be able to slide out of this pocket to be able to come out and be able to go back in order for serviceability. So while we did that, we're going to be able to put a little bit more strength into here. And this is the downward motion on the engine. So the engine's going to be rocking this way. So on this 45-degree angle, it's actually going to be optimal as far as mechanical load pushing down on the motor mount. because it's going to be coming more of an angle like this. So once we put our 1/4 inch gussets inside of here, this thing's going to be super beefed up. So now what we're going to do is go ahead and shift our attention to the rear brace that we had to cut out in order to remove the V6 and install the V8. All right, so our next order of business is putting this rear brace back into the chassis. As you can see, we had to cut it out in order to get the V8 to actually swoop into the back of the DeLorean. This originally was one piece. We went ahead and just did 2 slices in it. So this isn't going to provide a whole lot of chassis rigidity per se, but it's going to stop the back of the chassis from flexing in and out this way, just in case the car gets rear-ended or under heavy cornering. But it is going to allow the rear bumper to bolt back on a little bit easier. There's a big foam bar that goes across here that bolts on, and I don't want the engine to interfere with any of that stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to make it removable. We're going to be adding 2 plates on either side, drilling a couple holes, blending it in, and then this will be then through bolted in order to come in and out for serviceability of the water pump as well as the engine. Alright guys, as you can see, the engine is in under its own weight with the motor mounts completely done. We've also got our cross member back in the car. It's held in with Clecos for now. We'll put our hardware in a little bit later. We went ahead and modified the driver's side motor mount so the starter will be able to slip in and out of the chassis without any sort of heavy modification. It's always important when you're doing these type of builds, you want to make sure you can work on the car. So now what we're going to be doing is shifting our focus to the K-member. We want to put some reinforcement bracing in the back of the chassis to stop the back end of the car from folding up like this. So what we're going to be doing is going over and putting our stock axle back in the car in order to find out where it lies in relation to the chassis. So we'll go ahead and line it up with the Porsche transmission, take some measurements, and we're going to use the same 1-inch chrome alloy tubing in order to tie from this low point here where the suspension pickup is to the forward point over here where this suspension pickup is. By doing that, it's going to stiffen up the chassis. A stiffer chassis means stiffer suspension and a better ride quality. But first, let's put our support braces in and see how they look. Alright guys, we finished out the installation of our 5.3 LS for our 1981 DeLorean project for the channel. Our transmission brace is in, we got our motor mounts done, all our accessories are clearing, everything is installed inside of the engine bay, and we even installed our original rear chassis brace that we cut out to remove the original engine to put our new LS in. That's now removable as well with the aid of some screws so that we can service the engine whenever we like. Now, we have a lot more work to do on this car, so make sure you hit the subscribe button because we'll be doing exhaust, long tube headers, finishing out the intake system, and we have a ton of wiring and suspension and all kinds of stuff to do. Make sure you leave a comment below if you guys like what you see. Also hit the notification bell, and we'll see you on the next episode.